2021.
For Wednesday, March 27, 2024. To access this meeting remotely, join from a PC, Mac, iPad, iPhone, or Android device using this URL listed below. If you do not issue your name appear on the screen, use the drop-down menu. Click on Be Named to rename yourself to be anonymous. To request to speak, use the raise hand icon on the screen. To join by phone, dial 1-669-900-6833 and enter meeting ID 826-5339-6072. If you wish to comment during the public comment portion of the agenda, please press star 9 to be recognized. I want to recognize the land acknowledgement within our agenda. And with that, we get to item number 1, which is our call to order roll call.
Okay. For the record, this meeting was called to order at 6:30 p.m. I'll now proceed with roll call. Chair Moore.
Here.
Vice Chair Wilson is currently absent. Board Member Calavita.
Here.
Board Member Lefkovich.
Here.
Board Member Blackley.
Here.
Board Member Cayetano. Absent. And Board Member Moses.
Here.
We have a quorum, and I'll acknowledge ODPA staff. We have Director Aguilar joining us remotely, Investigator Wechter, Investigator Gordon, and myself, Alice Murillo. On behalf of the BPD, we have Deputy Chief Tate and Sergeant Edward joining us this evening. On behalf of the City Attorney's Office, we have Deputy City Attorney Chang. And of course, we have our labor negotiators, Laura Izon and Sarah Martosio. And from the city, and actually, that's it, sorry. Got a little set. Okay, and we have.
We're good to go. At this point, I'm going to go to agenda item number 2, the approval of the agenda. Is there any changes, additions, any corrections that we need to make? If not, I'll ask for a motion.
I move to approve the agenda. Second.
Thought there was some discussion about simply, excuse me, possibly postponing our vote on the annual report. Is that something we can do, or is the timeline such that
Yeah, that's gonna move forward.
it's going to be tonight?
We'll have a little work if there are edits that we want to make to this report.
Well, did everyone have an opportunity to bring the revisions and edits to the director and Alice Rio last week? That was our time. That was our window. And I know there's been some contention and wanting to make changes and revisions, such as life. I'm asking now that we keep moving this forward, as this has become a try-any report. So it's time. If there needs to be amendment, I'd be over to that at a later time, we can discuss. But this train is not scheduled.
Sure, I just call out that at least in the draft document that we have here, there are open questions as comments in this document that are actually clarify. So
It's all fast.
Yes, it should be the Director Aguilar. Did you catch that question?
No, I'm sorry, I don't know what the question is.
the draft document we have here contains all of the comments and open questions. Have those all been already resolved with their final draft that we need to be approving?
That would be, so we try to reconcile what was submitted to us, and there were areas that required deliberation amongst the board that we couldn't unilaterally just adopt. So we bringing it back to you for your consideration at this meeting, and then we would proceed accordingly based on the discussion.
Gotcha, so we might discuss some of these major concepts.
All right, so again, can I ask about the agendas? There is a motion on the floor, a second.
Any objections to said motion?
Yeah, by consent, we're gonna go ahead and move to agenda item number 3, which is public comment.
Okay. With that said, we'll now proceed into public comment. As always, we'll start with the folks that are present here physically, and then we'll go on to the folks attending virtually. With that said, is there any public comment? Okay, we'll now proceed to our virtual attendees. First up, we have Mr. Nathan Mizell. You have been granted permission to speak.
Thank you, Jose. If it's a member of the board, I'm actually coming in person and going to address item 10C most specifically. Yeah, that's possible. I'd prefer to address you in person in a few minutes or whenever you get to item 10C.
I'm sorry, can you speak up, Mr. Mizell?
It wasn't the motion, it was the clarity.
Sorry, can you not hear me?
No,
No,
Okay, now we can hear you.
So I'm hoping you can hear me. I'm on my way in person. I'd like to address item 10C. If it's amenable to the board, I prefer to just do it in person once you get there.
So we take public comment at 10, right? So that's
Take on it.
it's sure visible outside.
Okay,
sure.
all right, thank you, Mr. Mizell.
Oh, sorry, just for clarification, but it'll be after we've already processed that. I guess that's the challenge. We'll already dispense with 10C by the time to public comment, so.
but if there's interest in a particular item, we're allowed to take public comment.
We can revisit that once we.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for the clarification.
Okay, Emily, you have been granted permission to speak.
I can't hear you guys now. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear
Okay,
you.
it's got a thumbs up. I can't hear you at all. I just want to, this is just totally procedural. The audio is really bad tonight. I'm actually really glad to see the director on Zoom because I'm hoping maybe he has an ability to see how difficult it is to follow these meetings from afar. I don't know if there's some way to get an additional mic or just, we've been seeing this meeting after meeting. And I don't know. I just wish there was something that could be done. And I've never tried to listen back to one of these recordings. I don't know if it's any better, but it just makes it almost impossible at times to follow what's going on. So I'm just hoping maybe some technological investment can be made to improve the audio. But thank you guys. And I hope I can follow along tonight remotely.
Thank
That's
you.
it.
And
Jose, is that a mic down there on that chair?
yes,
Well, maybe we should bring it forward. There's nobody down.
yes, I can move that in a second. Also, just as a reminder, it's better when we speak up. Chair, with that said, we do not have any additional public comment.
But no further public comment at this time. I'd like to take us to channel number 4, which is closed session. The Police Accountability Board will convene a closed session to meet concerning the following: comments with labor negotiators, government code section 54957.6. Even our main negotiators for liaison, it's employee organization, the Berkeley Police Association.
Okay, for those who are physically present, we do have another room where y'all can wait. I'll be more than happy to guide you there once I've addressed those attending virtually. Those who are attending virtually, the webinar will remain on. Our audio and video will be turned off and we'll return once we're back in closed session. Thank you.
Mark's the end of closed session, which brings us to item number 5. But before that, Jose, did you want to do some housekeeping?
Yeah, just for the record, we want to note that Vice Chair Wilson came into the meeting at 6:40 p.m. and is now present.
Excellent. Agenda item number 5, approval of the minutes for regular meeting of March 13, 2024. Yes, Board Member Lethbridge.
I have a comment on page 13 under subcommittee reports. It notes that I was appointed to the operating conduct subcommittee, which is correct. But my recollection is that Board Member Cayetano was also appointed to the body worn camera subcommittee. There was a bit of horse trading going on because he was the only one on that, and I was the only one on that. So he's not here to defend himself, but my recollection is that he was appointed to.
Thank you for the note.
Are there any other additions or corrections? And if not, I'd ask.
Second.
Yeah, roll call and seeing or hearing any objection, I'm ready to move forward. You tell me. All right. Which leads us to agenda item number 6, WPA staff report. Director?
Good evening, board members, fellow staff and members of the public. Mr. Murillo, the timer is showing up on my end. I'm not sure if it's showing up. If it's showing up on you. Okay. But I'll take the hint that you want me to be brief. But we do have a relatively long discussion with the 2 closed sessions already. But I want to just a gentle notification for members of the public as well. We have been discussing that our office is going to be doing a 2-part move, so that the first stage of that move has already happened. We're no longer on 1947. We are now on Center Street. We are now located on 2020 Millview Street, Suite 250. We will update the websites, but we're still right around the corner and accessible to members of the community. But we are in that process due to our size constraints that we had in the location we were in 1947. And we'll definitely make ourselves available to members of the public that need to reach us. The other thing I wanted to just highlight in the we'll get into the annual report there. But I did want to, and I don't want to step in. Hopefully I don't step into the subcommittee. I know they're doing a report, but I just wanted to reflect. I had the opportunity to observe the FIP subcommittee, and I thought that was a very impressive conversation. We were really getting to the weeds of the methodology there. I thought it's a very important discussion that the board members and the police department was having. So I just wanted to highlight that for members of the community that might have not been present, because I think it is an example of the quality oversight work that's being done by your body. I did want to yield to our members at the city manager's office before I take any questions from the board members. So I know we have Dr. Arredondo and Mr. Brown available. I don't know if there's any updates from the city manager's office.
Thank you, Hansel. We are also beginning a move, as you might know, but we're in the early stages of that process right now. In terms of our work, we'll have an update in May, but Carrie has more details on that, as that's reimagining public safety, which is a separate project.
No, we can't hear you.
I would suggest changing your browser and coming back into the meeting.
Okay, Mr. Chair, but I'll take any questions that the board members may have for our office at this time.
I'm going to open it up to the board members. Anybody like to ask the director any questions? Board member Mike?
Director, thanks for the invite to the civil meeting. I'm sorry I missed it. Just how did that go? Kind of next steps on the software implementation?
Yes, so we met last week with the representatives from civil. We did an overview of what the implementation looks like. One of the things is making sure that we get the complaint forms and the accommodations form correct, because that's going to impact the data. So we want to make sure we get that correct. We did have a follow-up meeting yesterday with Mr. Murillo was present for that meeting. I don't know if you can provide some updates about that meeting.
Yes, of course. So as the director mentioned yesterday, I met with civil just to get started on the training component and making sure that the portal is set up in a way that we want it for a specific agency. We're at the initial stages, so training from an admin perspective to make sure that our controls for the rest of our team is up to date and in line with what we need. We do have a follow-up meeting tomorrow, again, on the training administrative side perspective to finalize some of the last details before we start expanding into other staff and we start incorporating into our operations.
So we've passed the city IT hurdle or whatever, right? Like that's.
I believe so, Director.
That's correct. We have the full approval, so we're in the process of the just outfitting it for our agency needs. And I did want to highlight one thing. We're also looking at the way other agencies are doing it or utilizing this particular system. And Philadelphia, they do a lot of policy reviews too, and there is a function there where you could do project management that may be of interest to board members to organize their policy review work within the system. That's not something that you have to make a decision on right now, but we will have that feature to be able, you as board members can potentially use it in that capacity as well.
Thank you.
All right, Director, I appreciate your time, and I thank you for your updates. I'm gonna.
Oh, and one other update, Chair. Please excuse me. I apologize. The horn back in, but Carrie was not able to get her audio working. But however, Carrie has led the effort to have our gun violence gun violence prevention RFP posted. It is live and posted now. I guess, Carrie, would you like me to put the link in the chat box or not necessary? Okay, we've got a little hand signal thing going now. So now telepathy's going, she's gonna do it. But this proposal is, proposals are due April 16th, 2014. And you'll find those specifications in the shared link that will be distributed by our chair and director. So having said that, I won't go any further into the details on it, right? Or no? Yes. Okay. Okay. Back over to you all.
Thank you. And that was going to take us to agenda item number 7, which is Chair and Board Members' Reports. First, let me start by saying last week, the director and myself met with Officer Valet and Deputy Chief Tate. By the way, I started with that. We had an excellent meeting, and also Chief Lewis was there. We talked about how we wanted to engage on a more basic level. And we talked about mutual trainings. We talked about creating conversation and dialogue. We talked about how the board would look forward to one, getting these regulations passed, because the Berkeley Police also wants regulations. They want the same guidelines and parameters in place that we do. And, you know, we're all working towards that common goal. I thought the meeting was great, and I look forward to meeting with the BPA and the department as it happens. We're gonna try and make that happen. So that being said, that's all that I wanted to report from my desk. I'm gonna open this up to any other board member for a minute of anything that they'd like to share. All right, not seeing or hearing any enthusiasm for that. I'm going to move us to agenda item number 8, which is Chief of Police report, which is going to be presented by our new Deputy Chief, Jen Tate. You have the floor.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. I'm here tonight to present the Chief's report. And before I get to that, I'd like to share that Chief Lewis has heard and understood the value of the PAB's request to have a police department liaison for you to help facilitate responses and strengthen our connection and communication. with appreciation for that request, I'd like to share that now that we have a deputy chief position in place, I will be your liaison moving forward.
Good.
Yeah, I think it's great. So with regard to staffing, we're in the middle of interviews and screening for police officers and public safety dispatchers. We have 5 spots reserved in the upcoming July Contra Costa County Police Academy. So we're hoping that through our current recruitment that we're able to fill those spaces. As we consistently provide recruitment updates for police officer and dispatcher, I think it's also important to point out that we recruit for other classifications that work within the police department. Those include community service officers, parking enforcement officers, and police aides. Historically, many employees who start with the police department and one of these classifications go on to become police officers. So we make it a point to do widespread recruiting for all the classifications that work within the police department, so that potential applicants are not only aware of the variety of law enforcement opportunities, but to also get the best people in the door who may later choose a different career path. And true fact, I actually started with BPD as a dispatcher. I'd like to highlight a few cases of interest over the last few weeks. We did have our first homicide in 2024 on March 17th. I know that there's a lot of information out there about it. In short, we got a call about 2:45 in the afternoon that day that there had been a stabbing in the 1300 block of University. Our officers respond and quickly detain a woman who was identified as a suspect and later determined to be the daughter of the decedent, and she has been arrested and charged with homicide. There have been several shooting incidents over the past few weeks. On the 21st at 7:26 in the afternoon, there were 2 victims traveling in a vehicle eastbound on Fairview from Harper. An unknown suspect fired several rounds at the victims in their vehicle, and one of the victims suffered non-life-threatening injuries. Patrol officers canvassed the scene, locating evidence and contacting witnesses, and that investigation is still ongoing. Again, on just last night at about 11:12 in the evening, we got reports of a drive-by shooting in the 2200 block of Bonar Street. Our officers responded and located a victim who had non-life-threatening injury, and they did locate a crime scene, collected evidence, and conducted a neighborhood canvass. That investigation is also ongoing. We had a in-custody burglary on the 22nd of March. Early in the morning at 4:47, we got a call of a hot prowl burglary at 2239 Channing. And the reporting party advised that a suspect opened a window and tried to come inside. An officer arrived on scene quickly and located the suspect who matched the description. We did recover stolen property from the suspect from the victim's residence, and he was arrested for burglary as well as an outstanding warrant. I'd like to conclude my comments with just a few updates, acknowledging that board member Leftwich sent an email request yesterday regarding policy updates and how they're shared with the PAB. Chief Lewis indicated to me that we'd be discussing the request later this week, and we'll be able to provide an answer regarding that request by next week. Additionally, she had inquired about the status of the body-worn camera draft policy. I'd like to share that you'll be receiving that draft policy no later than tomorrow with additional responsive information to the questions that were posed by the subcommittee. On the training front, today was our first active bystander for law enforcement training, also known as ABLE training. Director Aguilar had shared that there was some interest in potentially bringing that training to the board. So we've reached out to the ABLE program coordinators to find out how and what exactly we can provide. And we're interested in facilitating that training as appropriate. And finally, as Chair Moore shared, I did have an opportunity last week to meet with Director Aguilar, Chair Moore, and our BPA president, along with the chief. I found that meeting incredibly valuable and believe it's a very good starting point for us to build strong relationships in the future. And I certainly appreciate your time. With that, that's all I have. Does anyone have any questions?
Like to open it up for questions? I don't think so. Not seeing or hearing any. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time. Which takes us to agenda item number 9, subcommittee reports. Jose, would you like to? Sure. Take your time.
Regulation subcommittee.
regulation subcommittee, well, we let it first. Know about regulation. To be negotiated.
Okay. FIP, the Fair and Impartial Policing.
Yes, the Fair and Impartial Policing Subcommittee met recently. It's Board Member Wilson and Mr. George Lippman and myself. And we are in the process of putting the finishing touches on the report. It's with staff right now to make it look pretty and fix some last minute things. And we expect to get it to the PAB in a few days. This too has been long in coming. And we also expect to get it to the police department simultaneously and ask for their feedback in 2 weeks' time from when they receive it. That way we can discuss it as a board, perhaps at a special meeting in late April, which I think, are we going to discuss that at this meeting, whether we can have such a special meeting?
We can, the proposed date for the subcommittee was April 24th.
April 24th. We only have, for some reason, I guess religious holidays, we only have one meeting in April. We're meeting on the 17th of April, and I would propose that we might have a special meeting for the Fair and Impartial Policing. Well, I'm sure there might be other business too, but the Fair and Impartial Policing report will be back from the department by then, and you all will have had a good amount of time to review it yourselves, and so we could vote on it then and have it be ready to send to council.
We would follow a similar pattern of what the triangle report, where you'll send it out to the board and we'll have comments and then review and then vote on a final draft. Is that the?
Well, the subcommittee has spent a lot of time putting together what we consider pretty much a final draft. If you all have feedback, then of course we'll incorporate that into, but you will have time, you know, between whenever you get it, let's say in a week's time at the most, until the 24th. Yeah, I don't anticipate that there'll be a lot of mixing it up. I don't know, Board Member Wilson, do you want to say anything more about that?
No, I just think it's kind of an interesting process question for us.
Mhm.
Because we obviously have been working on it quite a bit, and in a way, it would be odd,
Mhm.
for the board to edit it.
Yeah.
Certainly substantively. That being said, it is, going to be put forward as a product of the board.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, I just think for our operations subcommittee, for sure, to think.
I would voice interest in discussing before we get to that point. I think I've sent several emails and very interested in the nature of this report as it relates to the police, the annual police report, and the questions of what denominators we're using to determine the.
We do address that disparity, that your discrepancy in this issue of racial disparities in between our report and the BPD annual report in the FIP report that you get.
Also,
So this report doesn't address the issue of bias per se in the way that the annual crime report from the department has done. We are looking at disparities in stops and searches and arrests. So it's a little bit of a different angle. But it's, you know, the working group on fair and impartial policing that was put together by the mayor followed on the heels of the
2018 report.
2018 report that was commissioned by the city, the CPE report. And that report was about this. And so and then the working group presented recommendations for this department. Some of which have been finalized, some of which are in progress, and so forth. And so our job was to, I mean, I think our job of monitoring us and assessing the implementation is to see how and whether those reforms have produced less disparate outcomes.
Okay, surveillance technology subcommittee. I don't believe there's any activity to report. Okay, downtown task force and bike unit allegations. No activity at this time. Okay. Body worn camera policy.
The Deputy Chief Kate mentioned that we had been in contact. I had expressed frustration over the fact that I hadn't gotten a response yet from the department. And they've just been saying how busy they are, so I'm pleased to hear that I'm gonna get a response by the end of the day tomorrow from them. I just have one comment though. I see on page 17 where we talk, where the subcommittees are listed under subcommittee reports. A new thing I've seen under all of them as of March 22nd, 2024, no subcommittee report has been submitted, and whatever, blah, blah, blah. And I'm wondering why that was added. Is that something in our standing rules? And if so, maybe we should change that. I can't recall, but this it implies that I don't like the way it reads. It sounds like we're not doing any work when
I know.
actually we're doing a lot of work.
We could definitely change the wording. The subcommittee reports column was requested out of it. And that's why it was incorporated, but we could definitely,
So it's not in the standing rules. It was
No,
requested.
no, this was,
Requested, I don't remember.
well, the purpose of the item when it was requested was that the subcommittees will submit the report using the link that we provide in our emails. So that ahead of time, we don't necessarily have to go to the whole list. It was a way that was requested for it to be expedited.
Oh, okay. Well, I personally like to hear the reports during the meetings rather than going to some link of something. So I guess I would request that, I don't know, is whoever requests that still here and still want that column?
If I recall, it was requested, it was suggested by Board Member Moses.
It makes it sound like no. It makes it, for example, the regulations subcommittee, our work is completed, so pretty much. So why does this?
Well, if it's a language issue or if it's, do we really want to use it for part of the process is the question we're asking. Do you think it's a useful tool or do you not like how the language works?
I don't think it's a useful
No, I
tool
think
or column, and the impression is that we aren't doing
Or
work.
just no.
It make it like an optional notes field, where it's like, we won't send 2 bullet points in, we can, but it's just sort of.
Right, or leave it blank with anybody that adds something to those two.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Good notes? What we got next?
So we were on conflict of interest.
Nothing to report there.
Okay, the policy review committee.
Yeah, so that's the formerly known as the lexical committee. I was also in communication with Deputy Chief Tate to let her know about the vehicle pursuits policy. That's what we're focusing on, which is the proposed lexical policy. And it's a very timely issue. I don't know if you all seen how much it's in the press lately, vehicle pursuits and the dangers they pose. And I had asked her about the timing, also the lexical policy that you've given says Berkeley all over it, but we couldn't tell if it's just the lexical template with the word Berkeley put in, or actually if somebody in Berkeley had gone through it to try to tailor it to Berkeley. And she said that they haven't done anything, they haven't touched it other than just to put the words Berkeley in it. She said about the timeline, they would like to finish before the ALPO online, which I guess is in 6 weeks. So ideally, that's what she would like. And I will put this in an email to you and Board Member Kyle since he's not here. And she would like to hear from us what our priorities are. So that was good. So we will be meeting I think we were waiting for board member Cayetano to say when he was available in for meeting, right? So we don't have another meeting, but we need to meet.
I would some of the six secrets, so we can speed process that way. Documentation and what are,
Right.
what are priorities.
I'll send out emails.
Okay, budget and metrics?
Leah, do you wanna, or I'm happy to?
Sure, I'll kick us off.
Yeah.
I'll start by saying we haven't yet started tackling the metric.
The actual, that's true.
Yeah, but we need to do that.
That's what we do.
We have been making plans on the budget. I think we had a very constructive meeting with the chief and the city manager's office. Was that just last week?
Was.
We still have yet to see a budget that we can actually respond to. And so that's one of our points of conversation, because we're supposed to be drafting again for this board a report that would reflect our position on BPD's budget. But we haven't seen the budget yet. And it doesn't seem that we're actually gonna see something for quite some time.
I'm sorry to interrupt. You haven't seen it, as in it's not physically able
Actual
to.
numbers.
We haven't seen numbers, and the process is a little, it's an interesting, kind of sounds like the city, interesting. So I think some requests have been made in the city manager's office. I've asked if we can see them. We haven't got an answer yet, but we haven't seen it. But then there is a negotiation process with city manager's office. And out of that process comes a budget that then we would see. So we're a little bit operating in the dark. However, I think we're focused on the most important things, which really is the staffing level, the idea of minimum staffing. Every meeting we get an update from the department on staffing, and really trying to step back and say, how do you determine how many staff you actually need? And again, what are the metrics that you're using to drive that analysis? And so that, I think, is a lot of what you'll see in at least our preliminary write-up, which I think we'll have to kind of phase it, because we want to get you guys something, I think, but we haven't seen a budget yet.
So here's, and what I would say, like, look, I mean, we had a couple of pages of questions and they've responded with, like, so we've been, I would say, getting strategic kind of input back and forth. Like, how are you thinking about staffing? How are you thinking about service levels? What do you think is acceptable? And so we're getting some of the narrative stuff to at least understand where she's coming from. But yes, we need to pair that with the numbers to see how that actually translates in action. So I wouldn't say it's, you know, we are getting information, but we're waiting on the final numbers. So I think already in this process, we'll be able to talk about, hey, I think there's some improvements in terms of how we could present this. I think it would be great to see what the plan is, not just the numbers, but like, what's the strategic plan for what we want to do differently with the department this year, right? Or something, whatever. Right? So I think we have some other observations we can already start putting in this document. But yes, we're waiting on the numbers. The good news on the numbers is, my understanding is we will have the numbers of what's sort of approved for the budget. We'll also have some of the stuff on the cutting room floor. So in terms of the prioritization process with council, we'll also have visibility into what's in and also what's not in. So if we want to make specific, hey, actually, maybe you should put that in, and like, we will have some of those, we'll have some transparency with it. And then I would just say in terms of timeline, because this is the other part of it, is there's a budget and finance policy committee meeting on May 9th, which is a subcommittee, a committee of the council, and then multiple council meetings, May 14th, early June, and final approval June 25th. So we're just aiming to kind of have a work piece of it somewhere, I think, really in the May timeline. So it's into that process as the council is reviewing it, making changes and edits, that we're riding alongside that timeline. What we're looking at. Is that fair? I mean, again, assuming we kind of get the data, we can get the time.
Sounds good.
Outreach and engagement?
My only comment was, Chair Moore, maybe we can use the FIT release, maybe as sort of a dry run for.
I think it's a great idea for a release and a rollout.
You know, maybe there's an event, maybe there's, you know, what do we do with our, the members of the press, members of the community? So, again, we should caucus with you guys and think about how we want to do that.
That's a great idea.
Okay, off-duty conduct?
That's board member Cayetano.
Okay. Operations and processes?
Board Member Wilson and I, had a conversation a few weeks ago. We're scheduled to talk again, next week, so hoping to have some updates for you.
Thanks. With that said, there are no additional subcommittees.
So this time that takes us to agenda item number 10, new business. And 10A is discussion and action regarding the PAB LDPA training report. Want to open up discussion with the board members first. Questions and concerns, and then director, if you wanted to run point on this, that would be great.
Yes. Did you hear that, Director?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, you said if I want to run point on this discussion, is that?
Well, I was gonna say, I was gonna let the board, because I know they have some questions and concerns. I want to make sure that you can answer those up and then go ahead and leave the discussion. If you're comfortable, if not, I can run with it.
Sure, and I just want to say one of the significant changes from this draft to this, from the previous draft to this draft, definitely working on reducing the page length. I know that was a concern of the board members. It still is and was a challenge though to reduce it even to this level, considering we're doing 3 years of review. We did try to address as much of the concerns that were brought to us from the previous discussion. We included an executive summary, clear recommendations. We have received, as we mentioned earlier tonight, some feedback from board members, and where we could cleanly do it, we incorporated it into where it was language changes, we incorporated directly into them. When there were some observations that require more substantive discussion, we just left it in the document for the full board to have a discussion and proceed accordingly. But we did try to honor as much as we could. This is a challenge, I think, trying to represent all the voices of the board members, and then also balancing, the requirements within the charter in terms of what needs to be in there. But we were trying to put forth I think a work product that the board feels comfortable with before it goes to council. So we're obviously open to any continuous feedback and any ways to improve it before it goes to council.
Thank you, Director.
I have one comment, and that is, I think that the hard copies we were provided are missing every other page because they're only printed on the front and not the back. So I'm hoping, am I correct?
Makes sense, yeah.
Yeah.
So, because the reason I discovered it is because I'm just going to propose, if it's not too much trouble, there is a section that should be on page 13. It begins on page 13, but page 13 was one of the every other pages that's not printed, which is the numbers and types of complaints and their dispositions and the agreement or lack thereof between us and the chief. And I think that section should come first before, for example, the outreach section. I think that's really, so much the crux of what we do and so important for council, the public, people to understand this discrepancy in terms. First of all, the level of sustained allegations being relatively low.
Right.
And then the lack of agreement between us and the chief. I think that should be upfront before outreach, which given that our outreach committee over the years has not done very much, I think that suggests that it's not what we spend most of our time. Although the office and the chair may spend a lot more time than some of the rest of us on outreach.
Well, the outreach section itself is there's a strong emphasis on our meetings and, participation. And it's even more limited than like broad community engagement.
But I will, in whatever way we can foreground the discussion of complaints and their dispositions and the difficulty in reaching agreement. That should be upfront.
So part of
That's
it,
just my,
so part of it is structuring where that section is. I would then
Yeah.
I think it also works its way probably into the executive summary. So on that bullet, on the first bullet on key observations about personnel complaints, I think you could have all that, out of 52 total complaints, the board carefully considered and, sustained findings in only X cases, and of those presented to the chief, whatever. I mean, I think you put the number right there in that bullet, just have like the total number that were considered. The board reviewed every one of those, because that's, something like we reviewed, considered, thought, cared about all of them, and after that review, only move forward on X, and of those X, none of them were, something.
right. And also there's a chart, it's not in my copy here, but there's a chart that shows the level of agreement, and it's 30%, if I remember correctly. But that's kind of not really a good indicator of agreement, because there's zero agreement on the ones that are sustained. That's the point. So foregrounding that chart where there's a 30% agreement rate is a little bit deceptive, not deceptive, but
Because the only time there's agreement for ones that were
when they're not
dismissed.
sustained.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
right.
I think the chart is actually something I added, the table. And I thought when I read it, that agreement rate was solely related to where there were sustained findings. Is that not true? Because I was surprised.
I thought that included all dispositions.
I believe it does.
Well, just, I mean, to add staff, have we had, in the last 3 years, any sustained findings where there's been an agreement? Because that's what I thought I read, that there were 4 with sustained findings. Or allegations, I can't remember what the next, but
That the chief sustained.
I created the chart, I think, because a lot of that being added for Holly, I think. I totally agree with you, like, feel like we buried the lead.
Yeah.
The most important piece comes after many pages of less important stuff. I also feel like if you put together all of the verbiage around complaint, investigation, and policy review, much less square footage in the report than BPD, DITSAT, BPD, IA, the dog, charts about who's coming to our meeting. And so I just felt it was really like off kilter. Yeah, that chart, Katie, you're referring to that, I did create that.
No, that's not what I was referring to. I'm sorry, it's not in my copy, so I.
Mr. Chair, and I'm sorry, is there it's a question for us that you want to address at this time regarding this, or is this just still part of your deliberations? I just wasn't sure.
I think this is part of our deliberations as we're looking over the document. I think we're providing some direction. But at the same time, if it's an easier process to do this outside the meeting with a few of our board members who are locked in with this, then we can make that happen too.
You're sure it's not this, Katie, it wasn't a chart, it starts at the bottom of page 15 when it says for the period covered by this report, a total of 79 allegations were examined with an agreement rate of 30% between the PAB and the chief.
Yeah,
So no, what's really odd about what's shown there is that's the BPD IA, that chart is IA, we don't even have a similar chart for our own.
Cause I thought it was a zero. I thought that the chief had,
I'm not sure about the 4.
So does the 30% include ones where we had, exonerated or not substantiated, or does the 30% include 30% where we had sustained finding? That's the question for staff.
No,
The agreement rate looks at all. Right, so it's.
that includes ones where we unbounded or exonerated.
Oh, okay, so
That's the reason I think it's been,
I totally agree with you.
yeah, it's misleading.
Because it was something different.
No, we don't.
If I may, Mr. Chair,
Of course.
I think one thing too that we got to be mindful of, and perhaps it's not clearly articulated, but there's a temporal element here. So we're talking about agreement and the complaint process. A complainant could file a complaint with the police department. We might not touch it until later, and or they can come to us, and then we will subsequently also give it to the police department to do these parallel investigations. So in the advisory capacity of the board, the chief will look at 2 different investigations and make a decision. It's hard to capture cleanly whether the board's analysis has really impacted it. So the agreement rate is really the end outcome, but there was no discernible case or allegation where you can neatly track that based on the board's findings, the chief did change her position. I mean, that it's difficult to capture those kind of analysis with the raw numbers. So I just didn't want us to conflate, like, these are the end outcomes, not necessarily the internal decision-making process per se.
But you do have the language, it says, okay. For a critical finding of this peer revealed that of the 72 allegations reviewed by the PAB and the BPD, so that's different than the 79 above, 23 were recommended to be sustained by the PAB. For those 23, the BPD and or the city manager only sustained 4. So I think that is, of 23 that we sustained, only 4 were sustained by BPD and the chief, which is like a 17%
Yes,
rate. So I agree with you.
that should be.
That's what we should focus on, or at least like 2 different, where we recommend exoneration or no finding, it's 100% agreement. We recommend sustain, it's 17% more.
Yeah, so I'm sorry for the.
Can you identify 4?
That chart that I was referring to was in the original copy that I gave feedback on, and it disappeared in this copy, which is why I can't find it. But anyway.
Chair, I think I had some suggestions, but the first thing that jumped out at me is the first sentence. Actually, it's in your message, where the first sentence says that we presented the 2022 annual report. And then elsewhere we refer to as the triennial report, and this covers 2021 to 2023, right? Okay, so we just need clarity about what time frame we're talking about. And I thought one way to make, I think it would be great if we could make this a little bit tighter and more concise. And one suggestion, although I don't feel super strongly about it, would be to combine the message, so it could be a joint message from the chair and the director. I would also, on page 5, we have the purpose of this report. And so I would just put that in the beginning, rather than having purpose of the report be something passed after the executive summary. And then the other thing, and this is kind of what we've been talking about, we don't get to the obstacles until page 29. And I think the obstacles are something we want to front load as well. And I think there's that maybe in the messages up front of the director and the chair, that they're a little more diplomatic than, I mean, not that we shouldn't be diplomatic, but I do think we need to emphasize the challenges and the obstacles And I think waiting to page 29 just is too varied, so I will move those up either to the executive summary or reference them a little more strongly in the message at the outset.
Thank you. Great note. Is there any other notes before we move this process forward?
Yeah, I think I just go back to Alex's question, which is like, okay, to meet the timelines, and I agree with you, maybe we need a couple of fast turn, again, not to bog down the process, but if we want to drive some of this, what timeline do we need to meet to make sure we?
Great question.
Tomorrow.
Yeah, we are,
Understood.
we are at that point where this is obviously 3 years in the making.
Yeah.
I believe I wrote that intro my first week as chair. So that's how long ago that was put together. So at this point, as we're looking at tightening this up and getting this down, these notes that we're providing are the final notes that we're going to establish. Before you were here, Vice Chair, when I did say, as people were saying, they had reservations about moving this forward, I hear those, I understand those, and I'm open to making an amendment document afterwards, that if it doesn't bring in the things that you need, or you want other updates to data, to even information about the board, I would love to see if we could put that in an amendment document. Because what we're doing is we're tackling 3 years very quickly, and of course, it's not gonna encompass everything.
I just want to, I think Vice Chair Wilson made a lot of comments on this document, many of which I agree with, and I just want to make sure that the outcome isn't that we just close those columns, right? That they're really.
It's all been either already been brought in, they're already.
So this is not the last draft, is your
Right.
point.
Right.
So, I would just say, I think quality really matters, and I don't think this product is ready to go. I shared that with you already. So we have to vote today, is this done? I wouldn't say, because it matters if my name is on it, I care about the quality of this report. I also think it could be a very powerful vehicle for us if we spend a little bit with it and do some of this restructuring to put the most important messages at the front and to really tee up what the media council and others in the public to take away from it. So I think it is worth it, perspective, but I totally appreciate that it's 3 years old. So 3 years in the making. So if there is a way to expedite things and still try to keep the May date, and personally, I'm not mortified by the idea that we wouldn't keep the May council date personally, it doesn't, concern me that much. But if there's a way to push both another date and keeping the council date, and it involves any work on my part, happy to do it. That's, just what I would say. But I know one board, so I don't want to presume anything. It's just my take.
But what is it about the May date that's critical? Could it not be a June date?
Sure, it could be a June date, but then again, we're gonna have to update the document once again. And that's the thing that I want us to take into consideration, especially as I'm saying, hey, maybe we wanna create an amendment. As we're parsing down this document, we're adding these 3 years, and we're saying, hey, we don't want this to be too big. This is representing our work from the inception of this council. And I already feel like we've already streamlined this for fear of not having the information readily available to other stakeholders or the media or the council or whoever. I hear you and I understand that, and I'm willing to take a vote, and I could be on the other side of things. Right now, what I'm saying is the momentum of this work has started long before this point, and as much as we're taking notes and we're giving the office notes right now, I'd hope that would be enough for us to move this process forward. And I would love to take the vice chair up on her offer and see if there are any other volunteers who would like to be point people with the office. In fact, myself, I'm there, so.
I'd be happy to do it too. I think, and then it's just a question of what are we actually doing tonight? Are we just approving that delegation to go with the team?
Well, then you're talking another meeting
That's right.
forward, and so we're gonna put this process.
We do have one, the April
We do.
meeting.
is before the deadline. It's on
The April 17th meeting, yes, it is before the May deadline. And
That would be an excellent compromise, it seems to me.
Well,
If we could go-
Director, if April 17th be too late because it's something you need to do, like send this back to city manager's office or
City attorney.
City attorney.
Well, Debbie. I'm sorry, am I stepping on somebody?
Because I heard somebody mention the city attorney, just to clarify our role here, under the charter, our role is to review for any confidential information. We were able to do a pretty quick review within a few days when the director sent it to us last time, provided that your edits are to the types that you're discussing right now, just moving things around, emphasizing or de-emphasizing certain things, as long as they're not implicating any confidentiality, I don't imagine that we need to do another review, or if we do need to do another review, it'll be just a really quick double check to make sure that whatever you put in new is not confidential.
so there, it sounds like the board wants to delay the process. Is that where we're at? If I could get a motion on the floor.
I want to hear from the director. Director, does this make sense if there's a couple of board members who would work with the office and we could vote on this on April 17th and still forward it for the May meeting?
Yeah, so originally, May 7th was contemplated, but then it seemed like there was another department that was requesting a special session on May 7th. So we're currently exploring May 14th. They would need some time, the city council, to review it before they call the special session. So I would say April 17th would have to be the absolute deadline if you still want to go for the May 14th date. And I do want to say, board member Cayetano is not here, but one of his concerns at the retreat was having it in time while the students were still around. But we're getting to mid-May, so that's probably not going to be feasible. But that was one of his concerns, I remember, from the retreat.
Well, I would move that we accept the generous volunteer help and make some of these edits that we've talked about, and then bring it back on April 17th so we can vote and still get it to council.
Second.
And just to clarify the motion, if I'm understanding correctly, it's essentially just to move the approval to April 17th to allow time for board members to and staff to implement.
Yes.
Revision. The revision.
And I think Director, well, I keep letting it face you, but I guess you can hear better. You come up with that you think is gonna work best, because it is hard for multiple people editing a document. So you may want to ask us to do sequential edits. And, or you probably decide if you want to do it. I just want
One thing that might be helpful for those of you that are gonna take this on would be to reach an agreement about what are the three things that we want the reader of this document to take away, whether it's the press or the public, however many things. But just get that solidified, because I think that's the most important thing. This is a great vehicle for us. And I think it can be very powerful. We need to be real clear about what the message is. So maybe if we could, however many things you think it is, but I wouldn't say more than 5 things, it's the key points here.
I did, we've done this off with copy editing, so something you're considering. Staff that this many pages, it should cost you between like $500 and $700. And I think you have savings in your budget. It's totally worth it, because
what you mean, like grant? You guys can.
that's not.
Well,
So again, for the record, it was moved to table the item on April 17th to allow board members and staff to implement some of the suggestions today. The motion was brought by board member Calavita and Seconded by Board Member Blackleby, if I heard correctly. Okay, with that, I'll proceed to the roll call vote. Chairman,
Yes.
Vice Chair Wilson.
Yeah.
Board Member Calavita.
Yes.
Board Member Lefkovich.
Yes.
Board Member Blackleby.
Yes.
Board Member Moses.
Yes.
Okay, and then Board Member Cayetano is again absent. The motion carries.
Excellent. That takes us to item 10B, discussion and action on BPD's 2023 police equipment and community safety ordinance and report approval or denial of the report. PA's recommendation for a systemic review of the Berkeley Police Department's police equipment and community safety ordinance annual report. This is not me.
This is the director.
Yes, Mr. Chair, so just a brief summary of how we got here. Every year, the police department around March 15th, they submit the controlled equipment report where they indicate all the uses and deployments of their controlled equipment. Under the ordinance, the PAB reviews it for compliance. We have, since I've been here during my tenure, had discussions about what does the compliance review actually mean and what does it look like. I have made comments to this board and council that superficially, it's difficult to look at the annual report and say whether there was compliance or not. Based on the summaries at face value, they do look like they comply, but we have not done any systematic analysis, review, body worn camera, police reports to ensure whether they are actually complying with these different controlled equipments. So the conversation that the board members have been having, especially this year, is what does that look like? What should it look like? In the initial memo I presented to the body, I talked about different approaches to look at that. Some of them were, they would require time and resources. So the conversation then evolved in the retreat. There was further conversation about how to tackle this project. And at the last board meeting, the board members requested a methodology of sorts to review for compliance for future years. So it is our office perspective that the controlled equipment report does comply with the minimum reporting standards of the ordinance, but we can't definitively say whether the uses and deployment are in compliance without further review. So the document before you shows if you wanted to do a more in-depth compliance review, that's potentially what it could look like. And I do recognize and acknowledge that this will take time and resources, but this is why we also recommended a segmented review process where you start it even before you get the annual report process, so you're not confined within the 60 days and potentially negotiate the review process timeframe with the police department. But I'll stop there to see if there are any questions at this time.
Chair Morgan, you mentioned you had taken the responsibility in the past of sort of doing this deep dive. And when you did it, what you did was you looked at each one and just said, does this look like you just one by one looked at
No, the process with myself and Chair Ramsey at the time where we met with officers that were dealing with controlled equipment, and we went through each one of those. We asked them what they use. We were given the information that you see on and basically did an interview.
Okay.
And so, yeah, when they were like, hey, we want the Barrett, and the Barrett's a big gun, we said, well, why do you need this? Just, okay. So, we went and said, hey, why do you, and we went through all the different equipment.
For every incident?
For every incident, actually, not even for incidents. Any times that the weapon was, and let me recall the word. Deployed, thank you. Anytime that the weapon was deployed is when we would look into that. And we did that quite surgically. To every incident.
So my read on what the director's proposing is then also the analysis that looks more at the trends and looks for patterns and looks for things that, so.
I support this.
Right, but that's just, it's enough, so, because it's like, if you're looking in isolation, you can sort of probably defend right, but it's to say, well, now look across the whole body of these experiences And are we out of whack given the, you know, the racial makeup of the people who, right, have been apprehended?
Exactly.
Okay, because that level of analytical rigor, we haven't had a chance to do in the past. This would be the first time to do it. Okay, great, understood.
Just a couple questions. So to that point, how would this compare to the use of force reports?
The use of force reports are very different. Anytime that an officer has to use force, they write out their own report, and usually we're not privy to those unless there's an investigation or we're brought in. A use of force report.
Not the role, no.
Right, right.
So I guess this, but to some extent, this is a different angle towards. use
You
of
do,
force.
well, you can see which instances, weapons or equipment were deployed.
Right.
And what is, what the department has in its coffers, so.
So, again, I also support the idea of deep diving into this data. Just what did you mean by available or alternatives, and how would you define what those are?
That's an excellent, well, is that a question for me?
Yeah.
Yeah, so and that's an excellent question. I think some of these are, well, all of these are very fact specific. So you need to look at the incident and try to identify, based on the totality of the circumstances, what would be a reasonable alternative to this. And you know, the summary of the deployments on the actual report provides some information about what was going on. But in one instance, there was indication that the officers were reporting to an individual that and I'm sorry, I'm blanking out, and I probably shouldn't do this, but the general essence was that the individual needed to be removed from that business. They had prior interactions with that individual, so you will look potentially at the history with that individual, what available resources they have on shift. It's not always equipment. They might have a particular officer that might have a better rapport, or might be specialized in a particular way that could interact with the individual. So that's what the alternatives would do.
Right, I would just, point out that on the whole, the data analysis that you've outlined here is associated metadata from a specific incident that you can analyze trends from. But what you've just described is the old process, right? You've just described looking at the individual case, subjectively reviewing it, deciding whether there are available alternatives. And I think that bullet particularly, I just call out as different than the rest.
Well, I mean, I think that I think this is a mixed approach, right? Because I think you're right about the available alternatives, but similarly, the qualitative analysis that's recommended is looking at individual incident reports and body worn camera. So it's like both reviewing the individual incidents and doing this more meta-analysis. One of my questions is remind me, like, first of all, we're reviewing this report, which is a retrospective report on use, not prospective request to use, right?
Correct.
And this language from the charter speaks to what is it? This is our charter, this section 2.1000.
That's the ordinance.
The ordinance. So this speaks to like analysis of request to fund, acquire, or use.
That's the acquisition.
So where is the requirement about review of the annual?
It's in the charter.
And what does that say we have to do? I'm sorry.
If I may, there's actually an interplay between the two sections that you talk about, because in the BMC section 2.100/050, it indicates the Police Accountability Board shall determine, based on the report, whether each piece of controlled equipment reported on has complied with the standards for approval set forth in section 2.100/040.
So that's why we have to do this available alternative. And remind me, and the one that's pending now, how many controlled equipment instances were there? Like 40, 60, I can't remember.
I'm sorry, did somebody say a number?
No, I can look it up.
Oh, so there were two numbers. One refers to the amount of, there were multiple officers on the scene that might have used or deployed equipment. So that's one number. And then the other number is based on the incident itself. So I think I think that the higher number, I want to say, was closer to 100, but the lower number where it's just incidents was way under that. So
Because I thought this proposed methodology was fine, but it seems like a tremendous amount of work.
Yeah.
To do, certainly not, you're not gonna be able to do it in 60 days. And I don't love the staggered or segmented approach, because then I feel like all year long, you're gonna be reviewing this policy, like it never ends. So I was just wondering if you might consider like a sampling strategy. That's a mixed methods approach to sampling, like part of it is random, but part of it is the most serious. I think, you know, you suggested in your segmented approach that we would look at kind of, you know, the most serious use cases as one tier. So I'm thinking of to do a sample, not to look at every incident, because I just feel like this is too much work. So
I'm not opposed to that. I just try to propose something and for the board to decide how they want to move forward with it. So I'm not opposed to any approach you want to take here.
I'm not the lawyer, but I just want to jump in here real quick. According to BNC 210, it's a shall, right? So we shall do this. We have to do this, correct?
Right, for the methodology.
But it doesn't say how we have to do it.
It says we have to go through every instance, right? Did I just make that up?
I think it's.
It's the report.
No. Can someone read it back out loud?
Sorry.
That's all right.
So with if we're referring to BMC section 2.100.050, indicates the Police Accountability Board shall determine, based on the report, whether each piece of controlled equipment reported on has complied with the standards for approval set forth in section 2.100.040.
Yeah, but still, you have to look at each instant.
To look at each equipment, so it doesn't matter, we're still gonna have to look at it.
I mean, to Reggie Wilson's, that you could imagine a sampling per.
I mean, if that, I don't know.
Just because there's this one, there's use of force, there's a surveillance policy. There's a lot. And so maybe this goes on this stuff. Cause I think, or if, this, and then we implement something that we think is more rational.
I think it's a great idea. I think that wasn't us who brought this in. I believe that was the union and the department who wants to take a look at these things. That being said, is there anything else that we want to talk about on this?
As a one comment that added the identifying the same person is subjected to use of equipment multiple times. You identify friends, officers,
Nice.
The only question is, Director, would it be, do we need to add, do you want to ask for extra time? Is there any value to ask? Is there value in asking, or are we just gonna do whatever we can within 60 days?
Is
There's
there
no-
value in what? I'm sorry?
In asking for, are you suggesting we could ask for extra time? Do we need to? Beyond the 60 days?
There is wiggle room within the ordinance that says it's by March 15th or a date. Let me see. So the report shall be provided, this under the section where the police department has provided. The report shall be provided no later than March 15 of each year, unless the Police Accountability Board advises the department that an alternate date is preferred. So that's where I was trying to exploit the possibility of this segmented review process where they're giving you sort of in real time, hey, we used or deployed this, take a look at it. So by the time you get the full report, you have already looked at these cases.
Okay. Well, with that, I'm gonna go ahead and move us forward to agenda item number 11. We okay with that, board? 10C. 10C, actually. Oh. Yes, well. Before we discuss it? Yes.
So if you'd just like to make the announcement.
Sure. Use my gavel, expeditiously and ask that we open up, a public comment before we go to 10C.
Okay. Again, we'll start with members physically present. Is anybody who's physically present would like to provide public comment on item 10C?
Okay,
Okay.
I'm gonna speak up, but I know the mics are a little hard to hear. I also said it is hard at some meetings. It's like, sometimes I can hear you. But, getting to my room here, board members, the attorney, departments, I don't think the union was tonight, but, it's good to see all of you. And then Pippa Mazel, serving board for a couple of years, sometimes, and I completed them and see specifically, because first, thank you for your work in really guiding the investigation of what took place in regard to the BPI team, downtown task force, really diving into the allegations. I wanted to share briefly my experience as a member of the public trying to get access to public records related to the bike report. I filed a request back in November of 2023, actually, excuse me, earlier. I got August 2023 in regards to the text messages that the bike team were sending. As you all already are aware, Officer Shadowdy sent or provided 17 pages of text messages and had very strong allegations about what he said both was the tip of the iceberg. It's now been over 450 days since those allegations became public. In that time, the city has managed to conduct apparently an entire investigation and tell us there's no racial bias in the police department. And that public has no reason really to worry about those allegations, I would say. And yet, the basic functioning of state law has not happened in the city. In regard to my request, I have waited over 8 months to receive anything. City told me in 5 different emails that the next response would be where I receive any other responses records. And my request was specifically for text messages from the bike team related to public business, and that has not happened. There is a request even before mine, we get you the number here, that also the city not responded to. That's request 22-1033. That's the one you have in your subpoena, I believe. The city hasn't responded to that either. And there's been a series of excuses given to why this hasn't happened. I spoke with BCA Harvey just this morning, actually. And the only reason he could offer me was some vague administrative issue within the department as to why it has taken over 450 days to provide a record that we know is public record and that we know the department shouldn't work. In fact, in the city of San Jose, the court says quite clearly in the California Supreme Court that as regards, I'll quote it, as to requests seeking public records held in employees' non-governmental accounts, an agency's first step should be to communicate the request to the employees involved. It's still unclear whether that's even happened. I guess that's now finally happening, and perhaps we will all know on Friday whether the department has done their first step in complying with the Supreme Court of the State of California. But I have to tell you and we don't go over it, but I have to tell you, in really the strongest terms, that we need desperately to reach a point where the charter in this city is respected, where the public and their interest in what happens to the department is respected. And we need really to underscore to all folks in the city that public trust is seen one place in our charter, and it's here. It's this body. It's this body's job to ensure public trust. And that's been undermined. And the public's ability to understand what happened in this department has been regularly undermined. And the excuses that administrative issues or why it has not happened are frankly ridiculous. I said BS on the phone, but I'll say ridiculous here. And to wrap up, I don't want to take up too much time here. It's, you know, as the next step occurred, I want to be very clear also when my colleague DCA Harvey, which, you know, we're probably happy that I didn't speak with the city attorney Brown at the council meeting last night. I appreciate her taking time to speak with me. Is this new theory, which I'm sure is not new to you, that you have no real subpoena power to subpoena anyone within the city. That apparently that was a made-up thing that you can't actually do. And that the other parts of the charter would say you should get these records, and if not, there should be a 30-day window where you get the records, may not matter to you. And if it is the opinion of the city attorney's office that your subpoena power is null and void as regards internal city processes, they should write that opinion up. And I would ask respectfully to all of you that you request that the city release that public. The public needs to understand that if this charter is further going to be eroded from its basic, most basic functions, that came from a legal opinion. We need to understand why that legal opinion was formed, and the public must know. It can no longer be a secret. We can no longer be in a situation where we are sitting here as a public with no idea as to why the PAB cannot do its job. And then 9 months later, when the PAB finally shows up at the council meeting, folks who have no idea what happens in these meetings will say, the PAB is not doing their job. Why is this report delayed? Why haven't y'all finished this investigation? What does the PAB do? That is what happens when we allow this constant and flagrant violation of our charter and of state law to continue. And I really look forward to your response. But I have to be clear again, this has been extremely frustrating. I wouldn't be wanting to go over.
Thank you.
So,
That's,
yes.
I appreciate your time, former Vice Chair Mizell. With that, I'm gonna open it up to,
Any additional public comment from those physically present? Okay. Now moving on to those attending virtually. Okay,
Oh.
Emily.
Thank you, guys. I'm gonna have to go, and so I'm just gonna talk for 1 minute about the annual report, which I hope is okay, but it will be very brief because I can't comment at the end. So just wanted to quickly say I really appreciated the complaints summary table in the appendix. Some of the numbering seemed to be like some of them were out of order or didn't seem to be in order. I don't know why that was, but just flagging that in case it needs to be fixed. But I guess this might have been said tonight, but again, I was having audio problems. I do want to just call attention to page 65, the BPD chart of sort of each type of allegation and then how many were sustained sort of column by column. I didn't see anything like that chart for the PAB ones. And it would just be really helpful, I think, for the public to have something to apples comparison. And I believe board member Wilson did note there was no similar chart of PAB allegations anywhere. I know there was some in the narrative, but it would just be great to see a chart of each allegation type and then sustained, not sustained, etc. for the PAB, similar to what we saw for BPD. And if I missed it, I apologize. That's all I wanted to say. And thank you all for all your work and have a good night.
Yeah. Okay, Chair, we have no additional public comment on that item.
okay, not seeing or hearing more comments from the community. We are going to go to 10C, new business, updates and discussion on next steps regarding the PAB's issuance of subpoenas for search for records pertinent to the completion of the policies and practices relating to the downtown task force and bike unit allegation subcommittee work. Director, would you like to comment further?
Sure. So just as a gentle update, since you the meeting where you requested or you moved for a subpoena, we did and you delegated that authority onto us. We did issue the subpoena as provided in the packet tonight. You can see proof of service. There were 3 items originally indicated in your initial discussion or consideration of this. One of them has been provided to you since, and there's 2 sort of outstanding elements. Did receive some response that one of the items in there's no responsive documents, and the other that there need additional time and around March 29th they should be produced. We did, when we issued the subpoena, requested that they be produced by by March 26th, which was yesterday. So we at this time have not received at least one of the items requested through the subpoena.
Thank you for the update, Director. Would you like to say something?
Yeah, you mentioned 3 items. I only see A and B here.
Right, because we were able to, since the last discussion, we were able to resolve that internally without the need to issue it, so.
I'd love to hear your thoughts. Anybody?
I'm really glad we did it and ready to see what gets produced.
Well, I mean, we are at the precipice here.
So what feedback have we received from the city attorney's office about this?
Well, we couldn't talk about that now because we'd have to close up to discuss.
Okay.
Didn't we get an email update on that?
We did.
Yeah.
And we've seen some momentum within the engagement.
Okay.
If that sounds like I'm parsing words, because I am. But that being said, still have one outstanding document that, that hasn't been produced. And so the reason that I was saying we are on a precipice is it's time for us to make a decision on what we do next as a board. And so I want to hear everyone's opinion. I want to see where we're at as a board and where we need to be in this discussion. Obviously, I think we've seen some things shake out from our actions, but I'd like to hear from you before I say anything else.
What was the reason given for the non-compliance? You're saying there's been,
We have, I don't believe we have, at least I have complaints. Do we have one?
Do we have what, I'm sorry?
Do we have a reason for their non-compliance to the subpoena?
Well, we were informed that it would take some coordination to get, because there's multiple officers involved and they work different shifts. So they were not going to be able to provide a response by the March 26th, which they predicted by March 29th, they should be able to get it resolved.
So they've asked for an extension to March 29th for both A and B, or is there an expectation that that's one of those?
The response for item A was there were no responsive records.
Gotcha. So to clarify, item A is no, and item B is give us a few more days.
Correct.
So Chair Moore, what is it that you want us to opine their response is no?
That was something we'd have to discuss. They're saying there's no.
I think I'd like to jump in here because I'm chair of the Downtown Task Force Subcommittee with Chair Moore. And first I want to sort of acknowledge that this has as Nathan, myself has said, has been a long time. And we have, actually done quite a bit of work on this and, could be on the verge of producing something. I think we need to discuss as a board whether we should try to complete what we've been doing with the information we have, or whether we should wait on this and not. A date has been given as to when this is forthcoming or not?
It's March 29th.
Maybe, yeah, March 29th, so 2 days, yeah.
Oh, well,
Now, it's only one other issue where it says there's no records that are responsive to our subpoena. So what we have to say is, one, do we want to take that and say, hey, we're good and keep moving? Or is this, do we want to take a deeper dive into this document? That's where I want you guys to opine. Where your heads at?
and what is your opinion on the subject being on the subcommittee?
Oh, gotcha. My personal take on this is, anything that we're doing now to reinforce the powers of this board, make precedent, and that I'm not thinking about myself or this board or me in this chair, but 10 years from now, when there's another chair here, I want to make sure that they have all the power, scope, and scale that they can do their job. So for me, that is my inclination. But at the same time, I don't want to influence your guys' thoughts on this. I want to hear what you have at the table, and I promised I was going to say this, but I wanted to hear your thoughts first. But me, it's not about me, it's about, making sure that this board is solid and, we have these powers intact for generations.
I guess my only read, I mean, I guess, again, I'm not a lawyer, but the question is, what does it mean there are no responsive documents? Does it mean that there are other documents that they just cannot or choose not to share? Because it's a disciplinary matter, we don't have, right, again, I don't, that's the part I feel fuzzy about. I have
Right, so
real context for it.
again, I'm not an attorney
Yeah.
either, but I assume when we're saying that the subpoena's, no good or non-responsive, that there's gotta be a little level of explanation involved in there.
Couldn't we use some advice from the city attorney's office about,
I don't know if we can on this.
well, what does the city attorney's office have to say about this? I mean,
What's the question?
The question is, when they say there are no responsive documents for the first item around the disciplinary, all records in possession of IAB regarding any disciplinary matters for the officers and any other member of the downtown task force and bike unit. Relevant records included, but are not limited to complaints by the public filed with BPD and their respective dispositions. And so the response is there are no responsive documents. And that is that because there are literally 0 documents that meet those criteria, or that they do have them that don't feel obligated to share them. I think that's
So you need to speak.
Sorry. I'm sorry.
So I don't have any personal knowledge of what documents may or may not exist. I am in receipt of a response from Chief Lewis to the director on March 21st. Was that shared with the board director? The email from Chief Lewis? Okay. So I'm looking at what you're looking at,
Yeah.
and
but how about what are our options going forward?
if you're unclear as to the meaning of the chief's response, I would encourage you to have a dialogue with the chief to better understand what she means by that.
Okay.
We're on our own.
If I may, Chair,
Of course.
and if I could just tap into the expertise of city attorneys, I think also important context is how long some of these records may be retained. So it's not necessarily saying that there were no complaints lodged against those officers. It might be that they no longer have them because they have since discarded them based on how long they're required to keep them by law. Are you able to speak, Deputy City Attorney Chang, on how long records of the sort are supposed to be kept, generally speaking, under the statutes in the state?
Years.
I would have to double check, but 5 years is what pops in my head immediately.
Okay.
After reading the email, I don't personally think we need to do anything more regarding this first item. I think there's an explanation of why the assumption has been made that there's no responsive documents. And it actually isn't that there's no responsive document, it's other than something you already have access to. So I personally don't see an issue with waiting to see what happens March 29th, and I don't think we need to follow up on that one. That's my personal view.
So there's a couple of options. One is to push ahead with producing the report and because the public has been waiting for quite a long time for this. And there's nothing to, if and when we do receive these documents, then we can always make further public announcements about that.
And the
To the
report
extent
could note that,
What?
the
Yes.
report could note what happened, that we subpoenaed the documents and were advised X, Y, and Z as of the date of the writing of this report, no responsive documents have been received or whatever
Right.
it is.
Is there a proposal to do that today or tomorrow ahead of Friday?
To do what?
To release the
Oh,
report?
no,
Okay.
no, just trying to get the FP report out. Yeah,
But I guess what I'm saying is, if we did receive the text messages on the 29th, you would.
Yeah.
Okay. Just historically speaking, I'm curious, the text messages seems to be a textbook case of relevant documentation that we've received similar documentation in the past, and that this was called out. Is that true for IAB specific documents? Has that been, like, in other words, is that a new precedent that we're trying to set as opposed to an enforcement of an existing precedent?
access to the
The
IAB.
IAB document specific
We have requested that in the past.
and not received.
And not received it. This is different because it pertains to a particular policy review,
Mhm.
which is one of our functions.
Right.
And
So have we landed somewhere comfortable? As a board, do we feel like, board Vice Chair Wilson, thinks we can let this, go and keep us moving and wait till the 29th and see what happens?
I think so.
I think so.
All right, and we're comfortable with the non-responsive answer from the chief. And everyone has seen that before we discuss and talk about it from the March 21st email. Do we know what I'm talking about?
I read it at the time I received it and it seemed okay, but
You see, you're okay with it?
well, I don't have it in front of me, but I
I
did.
don't have it in
read
front of me
at the
either,
time.
so.
Board Member Wilson, could you pass that email around? Is that,
It's not
So-
privileged, is it? I mean,
No, I just, I could never do this. And
am I?
keen environment feels really weird.
Is this?
It's just that you- it's confidential. This feels a little weird.
Yeah, no, I don't have access to receiving it, so.
That's why I asked. But if it's,
Well, I'll send it anyway.
Staff could circulate it if you send it to us, or we recirculate it.
well, I have another question for the city attorney's office. What's the, I mean, the concern would be if we don't say something that we might be waiving our rights or not complying with some timeline. So what's the,
sure, I'm sorry, excuse me, Vice Chair Wilson, you cannot send that.
I cannot.
You cannot.
Okay, that's good.
You gotta send it to him. He can send it.
Well, he sent it to us. Stop it.
I understand that, but if you want to resend it out, you can't violate the rule, like you sending to everyone.
Yeah, okay. That's what I was thinking. That's really strange.
Oh, no,
Yes.
which I did.
I forgot my train of thought. Had a question for the city attorney. Oh, I know what it was. As far as us being timely. So the concern is if we don't push ahead now on the response, are we waiving our rights? Is there some deadline that we have to comply with? Or can we just kind of see what happens?
I can speak as a general matter with respect to subpoenas, that often there's a process of informal engagement, informal extensions, and there's not an immediate deadline, right after the production deadline is passed to try to enforce a subpoena, after which you waive the right to enforce it. There is at some outer period that I would need to check the code again, but it's not like the day of.
I think if you could check that for us so that we know if there's some deadline. But if there's not a deadline, then I would say, let's just wait and see what happens. But if there is a deadline, we need to be aware of that.
I think that's.
So if you could just write to us about any outside deadline for enforcing a subpoena.
Okay, so I think we've landed. I think we're comfortable as a board.
Let's see what happens on the 29th.
Let's see what happens on the 29th. That being said, that takes us to public comment one more time.
Okay, at this time, are there any physical speakers that would like to provide public comment? Okay.
Yes, we do.
Thank you. I'll be less fiery this time around. Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of the lack of responsiveness, or the lack of any record being produced there, I mean, to me, it strikes me as thinking that Officer Casella, Sergeant Casella, at least at the time, suffered no disciplinary anything from his text messages or anything, or even the explicitly racist, which is amazing, but I also know that if there is no finding, that also means that even the additional records we may have been able to see, the changes under state law, we won't be able to see. There is no actual stated finding of any type of misconduct. So that's really concerning. Hopefully we can get to the bottom of that. I would say, again, these are suggestions, folks, but you've given extension after extension after extension, and the city has decided that they don't care. I don't say that lightly. I say that because this body is responding and having that communication. I think the BPA and what you were doing that so consistently, but to be at a point where you had to file the subpoena, they only handed you the documents because you were either filed it or about to file it, and then they decide to hand you the report. That's not how oversight in the city was ever supposed to work, or was ever envisioned, or was discussed. I can certainly tell you for a fact, it was not the way it was discussed in 2020 when the ballot act was passed, or by the city attorney's office at that time. I was going to touch again on what Frank made earlier. I've heard on multiple comments, in terms of doubts that the subpoena is even valid coming from the city attorney's office, directly from Sam Harvey today. I was on the phone with DCA Harvey today, and he seemed to call into question directly whether the subpoena power was even real as it pertains to internal departments in the city. If the city attorney's office believes that, we need that to be public. I'm going to stress that again. That is a fundamental block of what this change was supposed to be. And if it is, I'm not saying city attorney's trying to undermine it, right? Let's say they're right about the law, and for some reason, everything was missed throughout the whole meeting confer process that took years. The whole time council was considering, no one mentioned this at the council meeting. I was there at that council meeting where they put this on the ballot. No one said anything, they will have no power to do it internally. That has to be understood. Is the 30-day deadline then just a suggestion? Are we turning into a vibes-based accountability body where the department decides at any given time when and where it gives you the documents? And I, really suggest, I really appreciate the chair's comments in terms of thinking about this board long term. When I was on it, I knew the day would come right with me here. And there'll be a day coming where there'll be new members, different people, but how oversight functions in the city will be dependent on what happens next. And I really stress you using the full breadth of your powers as we know them, and as we believe they are, and not allow for any additional extensions or waiting around, because the department has proven that it's not magic to them. These public record requests are over a year and a half old. One of them, the other one's a year and a half old. Mine is nearly a year old. They were supposed to take the first step of looking at those officers and those text messages over a year ago. Clearly, if they're just getting to it now, they did not do that first step for the public. They did not do that first step for this board. They did not respect oversight in the city. And I don't say that lightly, but again, I hope you consider that as you go forward in this process. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any additional public comment? If not, I'll now proceed to our virtual speakers. No? Okay. Is there anyone attending virtually who would like to provide public comment? Okay. Kit Saginor, you have been granted permission to speak.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the work that you're doing. It was also nice to see former board member Mizell here tonight. I kind of want to echo a lot of what he said, although I'm not quite as, I think a little bit of patience is a good thing, but not too much. But I do really appreciate the work that you're doing. And I think it is really important to assert the ability of the Police Accountability Board to actually fulfill the duties and responsibilities that the charter granted to the board. So thank you very much for your work, and I appreciate it. I'm sorry I didn't come in person between the uncertainty of your initial closed session and the threats of rain. I decided to do this on Zoom. It's much nicer to actually be there with you in person. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, at this time, is there any additional public comment from our virtual attendees? Chair, I do not see any additional hands.
At this time, we will break from public comment and go to closed session.
We will be returning to now closed session. Reporting about
And this agenda item will cover what happened during closed session. The board sustained all of the findings of the ODPA, and we postponed one finding for. What is that?
So the motions were that the board decided to postpone the review of case 2023 CI 0017, and they accepted the findings. Director, could you remind me of the other case? Or, sorry, one moment.
13?
13, 2023 CI 13. They agreed with the director's recommendations.
Perfect. That being said, motion to adjourn.
Second.